The plot in which Anastasia finds herself is the most ordinary. The protagonist saves the empire from tragedy. When she comes of age, she becomes empress. And after that, the girl starts living her life to the fullest. She started making scandals, and she was sure that no one could ever stop her from doing so. At one point, one of the assistants told her that the priests from the temple had come to see her and were looking for her and wanted to see her very badly. The fact is that the oracle against the current empress, and when he found out that she was Anastasia, the girl's luxurious life immediately stopped, and at that moment appears Evelyn, a very beautiful girl who is the protagonist of the novel. Naturally, a love story emerged. After William and Evelyn fell in love, all difficulties seemed to disappear by themselves. Result, they led their empire to prosperity. At least that was the ending the girl remembered. Who has become a minor character, her story time should end at the most interesting point. She looked at herself in the mirror and tried to get used to her new appearance. Her golden hair, red eyes, and plump lips. She became Anastasia, a role she didn't like at all. The girl wanted to be the main character and became some sort of secondary villain. Anyway, she realizes that if she doesn't act, it'll end up like the original story. Today, Anastasia goes to meet Emperor Wilhelm, who is soon to be her husband. If their wedding is confirmed today, it won't be long before she's dead. Her goal is to settle down and change the story as much as possible. As soon as she thought about it, a man's voice sounded. The girl turned around and looked at him and couldn't believe her eyes. She saw this insanely handsome guy in front of her and fell in love with him at first sight. Anastasia recognized him at once, for judging by his perfect appearance, it was the same Emperor Wilhelm. He went up to her to meet her and to make sure, asked if she was Anastasia. The girl replied that she was right and said she was very happy to meet you. As soon as he touched her hand, she decided she had to change the plot of this story. She wants to be his wife, but to do that, she has to get ahead of Evelyn. The girl wishes he would love her as she loved him the first time she met him, even if she's meant to be a minor role. She's not the Anastasia in the book. Maybe she can make a difference. Sometime later, they came to the temple to solve some problem. Since the oracle is against the current empress, they'll have to come up with something to keep things the way they are. Some men came to the emperor and began to persuade him that another girl should take Anastasia's place. They're sure he has to do it for the good of the empire. Otherwise, it's against the rules. William replied that, in the first place, the empress, his wife, accordingly, there could be no other girl in her place. He tried to explain that his decision was non-negotiable. At this moment, amongst all these people, is the girl who is to take the place of the empress. Evelyn, the main character, she got the oracle's permission, so the priest came here with her. Relations between the emperor and the empress were strengthening. The girl was confident that she could hope for a happy ending. But in a most unexpected moment, something happened that no one expected. Another powerful earthquake is reported to have struck in the north. It's been pouring rain non-stop for a month in the south. At the same time, there's a serious drought in the east. No one knows what's going to happen next. The emperor has a lot of problems. He's the only one the people rely on. It's never happened before. No one knows how long it will last. A sudden catastrophe has befallen the entire empire. There was a crisis in the country, and at that moment, people who had lost their money started blaming the emperor. They believed that the catastrophe was a punishment for Wilhelm's failure to listen to the oracle about the current empress. People began to resent the fact that they didn't want to pay the price for the emperor's stubbornness and mistake every day. People began to hate the empress more and more, and decided that since the emperor didn't get rid of her, they should do it. They started sneaking inside the palace to get revenge and kidnap Anastasia. The girl was warned that she must save herself now, but at this point, she began to hope for her husband's help. One of the assistants replied that unfortunately the emperor was dead, attacked by evil men, and avenged for never listening to them. The girl couldn't believe it. She was beginning to hope that William was around somewhere. Hours later, they got to her. Anastasia was caught, but for some reason they let her live, and locked her in some dark place. The girl thought she could change everything, but unfortunately she was wrong. It was much more complicated than imagined. All she has to do is remember her husband and hope that sooner or later she'll be released. As suddenly, Anastasia heard someone's female voice. Someone asking why she was here too. She turned around and looked at this girl and was very surprised. The same Evelyn, the girl is outraged and doesn't know what's going on. She was supposed to be the main character and take Anastasia's place. But it turned out that the girl ruined not only her own fate, but Evelyn's as well. She began to apologize and explained that it was all her fault. They were here because Anastasia wouldn't let her become empress. To which the girl replied that apologizing was unnecessary here. You should have thought of that earlier. Changing the plot without knowing how it would end wasn't the best idea. Anyway, there's nothing we can do about it, so we'd better think about getting out of here. Evelyn continued to be outraged, for in fact, Anastasia had ruined not only her own, but the lives of the entire empire as well. The girl realizes her mistake, so she has nothing to say in response. They can't believe that their demise will happen tomorrow afternoon. People are looking forward to this moment, so they made sure that no one can spoil their plan. However, Anastasia has long ago decided that if she is to die, it will definitely not happen as the people plan it. She'd do anything, even drink poison, to avoid the smiles of the people who dream of her torment. Before she did, she remembered her husband's face and realized she had no other option. Anastasia closed her eyes and began to drink the contents. She was no longer in control of herself, and started crying really hard. She realized her mistake and regretted not thinking of the consequences. If she can go back, there's no way, under any circumstances, the girl will ever love him again. She's already gotten her punishment, and if she gets a second chance, the girl will not change anything, and will try to come to terms with what is destined to her fate. She won't risk her life again because she knows how it could end. At some point, she starts hearing sounds and voices. Anastasia remembers exactly that she drank the poison and died in an unfamiliar dark place. Very strange. But she continues to hear and feel her touch as if she is still alive. At which point, one of the maids comes into the room and starts apologizing for some mistake. She asked not to be punished for serving her mistress the same tea she had served in the morning. The maids began to oblige as if they had made a serious mistake. Though in fact, at this moment, Anastasia did not care for it at all. She doesn't know what's going on here because just moments ago, she was supposed to be dead. In some unknown way, she found herself in her room, and there's no one around to wish her ill. When suddenly, the girl walks up to the mirror and noticed a small wound on her arm, and then some woman offered to help. She came closer and said that something had to be done about it. If left as it was, it could get infected and the wound would take too long to heal. Suddenly, Anastasia looked up and wondered how this woman could be here. She had been dead for a long time. It's Duchess Helena. They used to be very good at communicating and trusting each other. She was by the girl's side until the very end, but unfortunately died that day, as did the Emperor. Anastasia doesn't understand how it is that she is now standing in front of her and trying to help with her wound. Except at the time, this woman was very kind and polite, and now she's unrecognizable. Though she's different from the Duchess the girl recognizes, this calm atmosphere in the room helps you think of the bad stuff. Sometime later, when the Duchess had decided to go about her business, Anastasia remembered her last words. She talked about second chances, and that if one came along, she would no longer try to change her fate. But did she really get a second chance after all, anyway? She had to ask a few questions to be sure of that. Like what date and year it is today. Afterward, she became convinced that she had indeed traveled back in time. It's a miracle the girl never thought it was possible. Then, Anastasia said that the Duchess could be excused. The woman thanked and went about her business. She doesn't understand why Mistress is asking such strange questions, much less thanking her for something. It's never happened before. It's impossible to believe that not only did a girl get into a book, but she went back in time. I wonder very much what she will do next, and whether the Empress will keep her promise. For now, the only thing she wants to know is why, after that pain and humiliation, after not living a day in peace, she is back again, and forced to participate in this again. She's very scared and doesn't want to think about it happening all over again. After some time, Anastasia found the answer to her question, and it was very simple. A minor character is a minor character. She should just go with the flow and not think about anything. Alone, she remembers the past and realizes she won't let it happen in the future. It becomes very difficult to understand whether to do anything at all, because in any case, we'll die, or only she, or all those who are dear to her girl, decided that the tragedy should never happen again. So she will have to accept and stop thinking of something. The Duchess said it's the 547th year of the imperial calendar, which means that Anastasia is now 22 years old. It's been about 2 years since she married Wilhelm, and they're 1 year away from having Evelyn in their lives. So there's still time to rest and think about what's best to do. But there's one problem. The first time she was here was 2 years before she became Empress, and she had plenty of time then. But it's different now because it's been a whole 2 years since the wedding, considering all the evil things her character did right after the coronation. Which means they'll want to get rid of Anastasia as soon as Evelyn shows up. The girl decided that there would be changes this time after all. She wouldn't change everything drastically. She would just try to avoid getting killed. She doesn't want to die and submit to some plot. The next day came. The girl had just started to clean herself up, and as usual, someone knocked on the door. She was informed that the Duke wanted to discuss something. The girl's father often invited her into his study, so Anastasia was accustomed to this. She didn't refuse and asked me to tell you that she'd be there in a few minutes. The girl is escorted by her assistants and does everything possible to prevent the mistress from becoming anxious. She went into his office and tried to get a sense of his mood, for it was easy to see what the conversation would be about. The man was usually very caring and never denied his daughter anything. But now he's not smiling at all. It's like he's not happy to see her. The girl said hello to him, to which the man replied that, judging from her voice, she realized her mistakes. Anastasia was upset because she expected it to be a little different. Since the girl has only recently traveled back in time, she has no idea what her father is unhappy about, or what it's about. He obviously didn't like something, so it remains to be seen what it is. At this point, the man began to complain that when the maids do something wrong, Anastasia constantly punishes them and becomes too cruel. Also, he does not like that the girl spends too much money. Now I can see why he's so unhappy. But it's not even surprising because in the original story, Anastasia had a very complex character. Her father reminded her that since his daughter was Empress, she should watch her behavior. The girl replied that she would try to improve, and at that moment, she realized that everyone around her was trying to make her life more difficult. She doesn't forget for a second that there's only 1 year left, and if she doesn't think of something, it'll be too late. After that, the father began to doubt later that his daughter was even listening to what he was telling her. So, the man decided to go about his business. He really hopes you hear him and at least try to do something about it. Finally, he looked at her and said the most important thing: Anastasia has to change, and change her attitude toward the emperor. In response, the girl froze in one place, and I couldn't even get a response, because if she tries to create a good relationship with the emperor, it will be worse for everyone. So she mentally apologized to her father because she can't change her husband's attitude for the better. It's better for the two of them to keep their distance and not change anything. It's even in the original story. Hours have passed. Anastasia can't leave the castle until the new oracle arrives. And until then, she should avoid her husband as much as possible. Every time she sees him, she wants to make conversation and then go somewhere with him where there are no people and she can be alone. No matter how hard she tries, she has very strong and sincere feelings for him that can't be ignored. Their wedding day. It was the happiest and most beautiful day of her life. And to this day, she continues to love and admire him just as she did the first day she met him. Nevertheless, she has to forget this man. The girl doesn't want to die again for love. On her way to her room, she meets a mistress who is obviously looking for her. It turns out the fashion designer they called in a couple days ago has already arrived. The Duchess needs to know if the girl will go out with him, for there are so many things to discuss. Instead of answering something, the lady looked at her and tried to create a fake smile. It's very difficult for her to talk about the wedding, so she asked him to cancel and say they no longer need his services. Anastasia refused and said she didn't want any dresses. The Duchess started to catch up with her to find out what was wrong, because not so long ago, a girl was just talking about how she was looking forward to the most beautiful, long-awaited, and happy day of her life. Before she went into her room, she asked the Duchess to fetch paper, pen, and one fresh bouquet of. The girl wants to send it to some lady, but she didn't say which one. Turns out to be the maid who apologized for the morning tea. She wants to talk to her in order to fulfill her father's request. She won't be able to improve her relationship with her husband, but with the maid, it will be much easier. Her helpers are really hurting, and every time, some are even afraid to go into their room with them, because they know that even if everything is perfect, the mistress will get angry and hit one of them. Some people are used to it, but for others it's becoming unbearable. It turns out that at that very moment, the maid who had recently apologized to her decided to quit and find a normal job. The other maids started to calm her down and told her to take her time. At that moment, the Duchess came to their room. She knocked on the door and asked that next time they should not make so much noise. After that, she went to that girl and told her that she was the one who came to see her. It's an incredible coincidence, because the woman has no idea that this maid has decided to quit, which means she came just in time. The woman said the Empress wanted to apologize to her. She personally invited the best doctor in the empire for her maid and asked her to convey her apologies for all that she had had to endure before. Though in fact, the girl who got into the Empress's body has nothing to do with that. She has to right the wrongs of the real villainess. The girl can't believe that Mistress has decided to apologize, much less bring a doctor to help her. But that's not all. Anastasia asked me to give her this envelope, so I can see why she needed paper and pen. The maid stepped aside. She was very curious to see what was inside. She saw the seal of the Empress and began to worry, for perhaps the letter might be cursed. She was reassured and told not to worry about it. They'd checked it out. The letter was perfectly safe. She started reading and asked that no one distract her, because it was very important. The girl still can't believe she received a letter from the Empress in person. It turns out there's a lot of apologizing inside. The lady admitted her guilt and promised it would never happen again. And most importantly, she suggested that she leave her job and rest until the wound was fully healed. She's very pleased to read these words because recently the girl wanted to quit, but it seems that she is ready to give a second chance. She felt as if it were a letter from another person, for there was no way that the villainess could be apologizing to her maid. It was evening after that situation. Everyone started discussing it. Even the Duchess didn't recognize the Empress. She doesn't understand when she had time to change so much. It was usually the opposite. Mistress never changed and thought she was always right. And when she was told she wasn't, those people were punished very badly. To summarize, the Duchess is in charge of the palace. She has been working since the reign of the last emperor. She has earned the trust, and so far, there is no one better suited to handle these duties. So there's really no replacing her. She's the best at what she does, and even the real villain was afraid to fire her. The woman had learned to solve many problems, and thanks to her, there had been no trouble in the palace for a long time. The only thing she couldn't influence was the behavior of the new Empress Anastasia. The girl never listened to anyone and purposely ruined other people's lives. There was even a time that because of the mistress's difficult character, the Duchess tried to quit, but in the end, she continued to tolerate it. The woman was the only person she asked to stay, because she realized that without her, there would be a lot of problems, and she would have to cope with them on her own. Meanwhile, the Empress called her to her and said it was very important, so the woman came to her as soon as she was free. Then she went into her room and asked her how she could help her. The girl said she had something she wanted to talk about, but she never said what it was. Anastasia looks very calm. She smiled and offered to join the tea party. The woman wasn't used to seeing her smile, much less having tea with her during an important conversation. The Duchess was getting very nervous, for she didn't know what to expect from her or how it would end up. She's very afraid that Mistress will start pointing out her mistakes or resenting something else, like she did before. The girl saw this and warned that she had nothing to worry about. She said she was fine and asked her to just listen to what she was about to tell her. Anastasia smiled and purposely began to delay that moment to say what she'd called the Duchess for. And as soon as it happened, the woman couldn't stand it and accidentally dropped her cup of hot tea. She rose from her chair and asked, "Really?" Madame was not joking and spoke in complete seriousness. Elena thought she had just heard it. She didn't believe those words and was very much surprised by them. It's very interesting what she said to her, and what could have caused that reaction. It must be something very serious. It turns out that the girl continues to fulfill the requests of her father. With the maid, she has already made peace. It remains to establish relations with her husband and begin to participate in the affairs of the palace, since the first, to realize the impossible. The girl decided to engage in the latter. That's what she told her. Elena never thought Anastasia would ever be interested. The girl realizes that she shocked her assistant a lot, so gave her a little time to calm down. Meanwhile, Elena returned to the table and apologized for the broken cup. She explained that it wasn't on purpose. Anastasia replied that everything was fine. She called the maids who would soon clean everything up. After that, they went back to talking. Very curious what all this means. Is the girl planning to fire Elena and start doing her job? It's very suggestive, and the woman seems to be in a very bad mood. She said that she was of course very glad that the girl had such a wish, but asked her not to forget that the internal affairs of the palace are not solved by a single wish. Elena thinks it's some kind of joke because before, Mistress was never interested in something like this. She liked to relax and do something bad. She never took any interest in papers, problems, or anything else that misses. Besides, Anastasia has no experience. She has never worked and doesn't know how hard it is, especially when some problems appear. The girl knew she would be discouraged, but either way, if she didn't start doing it, she would be killed. She explained that she knew full well that all the affairs of the palace were much more complicated than they appeared at first sight. She'll have to go through the internal palace ledgers every day, supervise all staff, allocate the budget, and do everything possible to make everyone comfortable. The woman is sure that if Anastasia had been in her shoes for just one day, she would never want to do it. Everyone thinks she has a lot of free time, but, in fact, no one even realizes how hard it is to keep track of everything. In this situation, there are only two options. The first, the girl wants to temporarily take care of some business and does not plan to fire Elena. The second, she does not realize the complexity of the work, wants to take Elena's place and fire her. Very interesting what happens next, because if she does fire her assistant, it will be one of the biggest mistakes of her life. When she has problems and is short on time, she'll want her back, and most likely the woman will never agree to that. So Anastasia should remember the lesson from your past and take her time with the decision. She had already seen more than once that before doing anything, one should at least ask for advice, think things through, and take one's time. Elena has stopped talking. She only wants to know one thing: what it all means and how this conversation will affect her job. Meanwhile, the moment had finally come when the girl would say the most important thing. She took the assistant's hands in hers and said she was just helping her with her work. Anastasia asked to trust her and promised she'd do her best, which means she wasn't going to fire anyone. She just needs to learn and temporarily become her assistant. The girl said that if suddenly, she would be very bad at it. Elena could not be afraid and immediately say that something was wrong. The woman could not contain herself and started crying. She was very worried and was afraid that she would lose her job. Anastasia didn't think she would scare her that much, so she decided to make her a little happy and promised that if things got bad, Elena could tell her and the girl would stop helping her out. It means that the moment a woman doesn't like something or a girl doesn't do well, it will stop immediately. After that, the mistress decided to admit for the first time that she actually really appreciated this woman's work. In the original story, the real villain always devalued the Duchess's work and said she could easily do without it. The same way she behaved towards all the other assistants and was just unbearable. Therefore, the words that the girl is very grateful for her work caused such emotions. The woman did not hold back and admitted that she had longed to hear it for a long time. In the end, the girl handled her father's second request, unfortunately as much as she wanted to, but the third one, it would be too dangerous to fulfill. Afterwards, Anastasia asked whether the mistress had handed her present and the letter of apology to the maid, to which the woman replied that she had done everything, but did not understand what it was. The girl wondered if she should tell how she had struck the maid, so obliged to apologize, but that Anastasia, who recognizes the Duchess, should say a little differently, viz., that she just wants to change, that she's tired of being the villain everyone hates. She confessed to her that after meeting her father, she realized how much she had made him worry. The girl decided to become a true empress so that she would not disappoint him or anyone else from now on. She was curious to know her opinion, so Mistress asked if it was too late for her to think about it. The woman didn't expect to hear that and was very surprised. At first, she didn't know what to say to that. And yet, she has spoken her mind. Elena is sure that it's never too late to correct past mistakes. So, she will support her in that. Anastasia remembers the real villain and imagines how hard it is for Elena to attach to a brand new person. In any case, she will not make it worse. The girl is sure that if she starts with herself, everything around her will be the same, getting better and better. The assistant is very glad that the Empress trusts her and tells her of her plans. In response, the girl thanked her for the fact that Elena always supported her even when it was very difficult and unbearable. The evening came, and as usual before going to rest, the staff began to discuss the latest news. At that moment, some guy was passing by the maids. He heard it and decided to stop to overhear something interesting. The girls didn't even notice him otherwise talking about everything they'd learned. Someone told them that the Empress had apologized to one of the maids, and also had decided to attend to the internal affairs of the palace. The guy heard it and thought it was some kind of joke, because there was no way a girl who could only lounge around and be indignant would decide to get down to business. It sounded too plausible to me. He even thought that maybe he'd just heard it. Meanwhile, the emperor lingered in his study, and just as he was about to leave, someone knocked on the door. The guy allowed in, but warned that he had very little time, was very tired and wanted to go on vacation. It turns out the guy who overheard the maids talking is the emperor's personal aide. And of course he came straight to his office to tell him some very interesting news. The lad marveled that the emperor was still in his office when he went to him, sure he wouldn't be here. But as luck would have it, the guy warned me he had something of interest. To which the emperor replied that if he wanted to talk to him about the empress, he didn't want to hear anything about her. He made it clear that if his assistant wanted to say a word about her, he'd regret it very much. But the aide is sure the emperor has no idea how much he'd be interested in hearing about it. He ignored his words and decided he had to take his chances. Even though the guy has been working here for over a decade, he still can't get used to that menacing stare. After a few minutes, Steve promised that if the gentleman would listen to him, he would certainly not regret the... Judging by the emperor's reaction, the kids got him interested. Eventually, Wilhelm gave in and asked to be told everything. At this point, the emperor couldn't believe his ears, and admitted that indeed, it was very interesting. He had heard about all the latest news and didn't recognize his wife. He thought maybe they were talking about different people. He married a villain who doesn't know what work is and has never apologized to anyone. He doesn't understand when she had time to change so much, and is sure it's probably just a rumor or someone's dreams. Steve asked if the emperor wanted to get some proof and verify that his wife had indeed become a different person and had changed a great deal. Wilhelm replied that if the lad could do it, he would be very grateful to him. But for now, the emperor refused to believe it. In fact, he was sick of her horrible temper, and the emperor tried to do something about it. But in the end, it just got worse. He doesn't want to see or hear from her. The guy is sure Anastasia will never change, and everything he could do, he has already done. But unfortunately, it was to no avail. Wilhelm has long wished that she would, at least once, look at herself from the outside and feel what it's like to communicate and work with someone like her. The next day came, and first thing in the morning, everyone was very upset. No one's mood, unpleasant thoughts, and memories. Today is the day to remember Anastasia's deceased father-in-law, past Emperor Charles II. The girl is not used to the complete silence. There are no people in the street because everyone is going to a meeting. At one point, even though the girl and her assistant had left earlier than everyone else, they started running late. Anastasia, even on a day like this, always dressed perfectly. But this morning, she thought it was a bit much. She woke up, and when they started to clean her up, she was very surprised at her outfit. The Empress imagined some dark clothes without jewelry and beautiful hair. But in the end, she was dressed up as if for a feast. The assistants are used to choosing the best for her, so even on a day like this, they picked out the most luxurious things. She didn't blame them for it. After all, they were just doing what they were used to. They automatically chose a nice dress, and forgot that today, it would be a bit inappropriate. The Empress thanked them for their help, but asked that today, her image be changed a little. Everything is really classy and very beautiful. It's just that people who will be at the event might misunderstand her. Anastasia asked to bring her a black dress without any jewelry and pearl earrings. The maids admitted their mistake, and explained that they hadn't thought of it at all. But anyway, the girl isn't mad. She's grateful for their efforts and knows they didn't do it on purpose. Meanwhile, it was time for the locked woman to get out of the carriage, and she was given a hand and helped to descend the... Before leaving, the Duchess warned me that there was one very important point. The stairs to the main hall are very dangerous, so you have to be careful not to slip. The girl thanked for the help and said it was very timely. She started to climb the stairs, but her heels made it very hard. Elena, to back up her mistress, decided to walk behind her, and at some point the two of them heard a loud noise. The girl immediately recognized that it was definitely the sound of a carriage. She turned around, but because of the steps and uncomfortable shoes, it was not possible to do it quickly. And yet they saw that the Emperor's carriage had arrived. It was markedly different from all the others. Anastasia tried to look out the window to see her husband, She imagines how he's feeling right now and doesn't know what's best, to approach him or not approach him and remind him of the reason for the event. After a few minutes, he got out of the carriage and looked around. The sad looks of the people and the silence spoiled his mood even more. But when he saw Anastasia, he wanted to turn around and drive back just to avoid seeing her. The girl felt it and started to get very nervous. She was scared because she didn't know how he would react to this. As suddenly, very unexpectedly, instead of ignoring her, he greeted her and asked if she's okay. Apparently the guy is interested in her changes and wants to know if it's true or not. After that, they began to climb the stairs and prepared to endure the atmosphere that awaited them inside the hall. Since the girl's a little late, she's the one everyone's waiting for. The Empress apologized and thanked the fact that no one dispersed and everyone stayed to wait for her. At this moment, as usual, everyone began to discuss her outfit. No one expected that instead of a bright dress, this time, the Empress would be in black. No one expected her to have a conscience, because usually the villain deliberately fed on pissing people off and came in all dressed up. Anastasia overheard these conversations, but still, she'd rather not pay attention to it. Then her husband, Emperor Wilhelm, walked into the hall. Unlike the girl, he was welcomed. People's reaction to him is quite different. She turned around and looked at him and was convinced again that she was still hated. No matter how hard she tried to improve, people's opinions would never change. Anastasia felt superfluous, even though she was the Empress and should absolutely not care about the opinions of those around her. It was only now that she fully realized that she was back in the past, a very unusual and strange feeling. All alive and well, but unfortunately that's the only thing she's happy about right now. The Empress was in a desperate situation, for under any circumstances, either she alone or all without exception would perish. It's impossible to imagine how difficult it is for her to pull away and try to unfriend the person she loves. In any case, she would have to accept it, or it would only get worse. Meanwhile, everyone present was asked to take their seats. The organizer thanked everyone attending today's event and asked for a moment of silence. At this point, Wilhelm looked toward his wife and noticed that she was purposely averting her gaze. He wonders if she doesn't want to see him, or if she's just trying to hide her emotions. He moved closer and asked why she had stopped looking at him before. That was how he acted. The girl doesn't even know what to say to that. It's really hard for her to know if it's safe to talk to him. First of all, before, he ignored her all the time. And now he doesn't like it when she behaves the same way. And secondly, this communication can cause a lot of problems. Anastasia purposely continued to ignore him, just to avoid seeing that cold stare and making another mistake. Even though she'd like to hug him and explain, she'd rather not think about it. It's very simple. It's to keep you and him alive. So she keeps looking away, and to explain her behavior, she said it's okay, and if she offended him, she apologizes. Wilhelm had never heard such words from her, and at that moment, he could not believe his eyes. His wife modestly dressed, behaving decently, and even talking politely. She doesn't look like herself at all, the guy said. She's like a different person. He doesn't recognize her. Anastasia explained that she just got tired of being bad, and recently wanted to change the image of a villainess to a fair empress. She realizes it all sounds too weird, especially after the person she used to be. So to prove it, she suggested a very simple way to observe her and see for yourself. Wilhelm was so surprised that he stopped noticing everything around him. He became very interested in talking to her and learning something new. When she starts telling him something, the guy forgets that's not why he came here. Now he realizes that the news the aide recently broke is indeed true. At some point, the guy slowly started to remember their past. He wondered if she still had any feelings, because lately they've been equally trying to avoid each other and haven't seen each other in over a month. The girl said she didn't want to talk about it, especially not at a good time. The only thing she could tell him was the reason for her change, namely, she's just sick of watching her father suffer, embarrassed by her behavior. The Emperor agreed that she was actually a really unbearable character. He still didn't understand what he liked about her. And how could he propose to an insufferable villain? It's like the guy was out of control and it just happened. And yet, the girl only agrees to hang out with him because she's in the past. And so far, it's not too dangerous. The Empress decided that she would not dwell on what was fleeting. After a few hours, the event came to an end. People began to disperse, and some didn't even notice how the time had passed. At which point, the girl sped up to avoid talking to her husband. when suddenly, when she was about to go out, someone asked her to stop. But from the voice, the girl realized that it was definitely not her husband. This guy greeted her and hinted that it would be nice if the Empress stayed a little longer. She rarely visits the temple lately, so he asked her to think about it. The girl looked at him and made it clear that she didn't have time for this at all. To which the guy replied that he understood everything, but still, it wouldn't hurt to visit the temple more often. Immediately after, the Empress left the temple and began to look for her carriage. As soon as she left the building, she felt much better. Of course, no one doubted that she would not get away quietly. The Emperor caught up with her, which means that after the change, no matter how hard he tries to deny it, Wilhelm became interested in her again. He asked her to stop and promised that this conversation wouldn't take too much time. Anastasia asked how she could help him, but warned him she had too little time. The guy offered to go to the palace together, which means he's really interested in figuring things out. The girl expected anything but this. She realizes he's very interested, but it's unclear what he wants to accomplish. She asked what he needed it for, to which the guy replied that they just hadn't seen each other in a while, so there would be plenty to discuss. The Emperor is sure that there should be no refusal, because before, Anastasia only dreamed about it, but now, everything has changed. The girl replied that she is not interested in it. The guy doesn't understand why she said no and for the first time thinks she might not have feelings for him. Not to sound too rude, she explained that actually she'd love to talk to him, but on her way home, she has something to discuss with the Duchess, so she has to cancel. The woman joined the conversation, and to make the Empress's words more convincing, she confirmed that there was a lot of business at the palace right now, so they would have to postpone this conversation for a while. The girl said goodbye and asked him not to be offended, because as soon as she had some free time, she would let him know about it. As soon as she spoke of some business, the Emperor became a little indignant, for before, for many years, she had never had any work to do. And now that he wants to talk to her, she suddenly has important things to do. He just wanted to know if the rumors his assistant had recently told him were true. In the meantime, Anastasia had arrived home, and the first thing she did was to go into her study. Her assistant came up to her and asked her what the lady wanted to talk to her about in the carriage. The woman assumed something unlikely. The Empress wants to take away all her duties and give her a few days off. They laughed at the joke and finally decided to start with the simplest. Elena brought some documents and asked to study everything carefully. Mistress looked at the first few documents, curious to see if she would understand any of the. Anastasia scrutinized what her assistant was doing. Her duties included assigning work to staff, budgeting for the Emperor's birthday and everything else that goes with it. She has to make a huge number of lists, like a list of girls who have recently debuted. Everything has to be written down. The woman said it's a very easy job, so she's giving her 4 days to handle it all. The Duchess is sure that if the Empress has really decided to change, she should definitely handle it, or at least try to do so. Because if not, she will immediately refuse. Will not even begin to sort out. The girl looked at these documents and cannot imagine how it can be managed in a few days. This is just one of the lists that can be easily handled by a beginner. But at first glance, it looks overly complicated. As suddenly the Empress took a risk and promised she could manage in just 1 day. The next day came. The Duchess woke early in the morning on purpose to see if her new assistant had kept her promise. Because all the times she was overconfident and promised she could handle anything. At the moment, it's only 7 o'clock in the morning, which is the time a girl usually sleeps. I wonder if she'll keep her word, or if she'll change her mind and refuse to do the hard work as usual. Elena walked into one of the rooms and saw the maids actively discussing something. She said hello to them, and in reply, the girls said that something incredible had happened. The Empress had woken up much earlier than usual and gone to her study. The woman couldn't believe her ears. She doesn't understand how this is possible because it sounds too unrealistic. At that moment, Anastasia entered the room, holding the very document she had promised to fulfill in 1 day. I wonder if she did it, because if she kept her word, that would be amazing. The first thing the assistant did was ask how her mistress had slept, to which the girl replied that she was a little sleep-deprived, but that she'd done something important. She handed over this document and said she had a lot of doubts, so she asked to point out if there were any errors or deficiencies. Elena saw many items and even more details. This job should have taken at least 4 days, all done perfectly, without a single mistake. The woman was very surprised and began to wonder if the Empress was trying to deceive her, because if not, Anastasia turned out to be a very clever girl. It turned out that all this time, the woman constantly underestimated her and was sure that the girl was not capable of it. She apologized right away and said she shouldn't have doubted her. The girl looked at her and still, she didn't say a single word, very interested to know how she did it. The woman looks forward to this moment, for even she has never been able to get it over so quickly. At this point, the Empress said that she did not accept apologies. In return, she was only interested in one thing: for a woman to praise her and never again think that Anastasia was capable of anything. As usual, after this situation, even the maids found out about everything. They began to discuss the subject and began to suspect that for the past few years, the Empress had been on a self-training course, and her abilities were recognized even by the Duchess, at which point, the Emperor's aide was once again at her side. This time he couldn't pass by. The guy came up and scared the girls. They started screaming loudly, because they thought it might be the Empress or her assistant. After that, the girls noticed that the Emperor's aide was entering this palace too often, to which the guy replied that he was just passing by. He said that lately, he had noticed a completely different atmosphere, so he was curious to know what was going on here. He said it on purpose so that the maids would tell him everything, and at that moment one of them came up and whispered that she wouldn't tell him anything. They like to gossip, of course, but they realize that it's not advisable for outsiders to know about it, because if someone finds out that the girl has locked herself in her office and is doing palace business, or that she does most of the work the Duchess used to do on her own, and has even forgotten about dresses, tea parties, and vacations, girls will be the first to be punished for spreading information to strangers who shouldn't know. In the end, as usual, they couldn't help themselves and told him everything, even that some people began to suspect a serious illness in the Empress. The boy was once again convinced that the maids made it easy to find out all kinds of information. They're completely inept at keeping secrets and don't realize how much trouble they're causing. Meanwhile, the girl continues to work. She doesn't leave her office and she's always doing something. She even contemplated that perhaps some of her assistant's work would be taken over by her. It would be to get less rest and do some useful work. Since the girl who came into this body had previously worked with documents in her real life, she was very lucky, despite the fact that she had a ton of stuff to do in a couple days, with no rest or free time. She also had to reanalyze Anastasia's reputation. Her assistant kept adding cases that involved more than just paperwork. Elena recalled that they have been short of gardeners for a long time, so the girl began to calculate how much money would need to be allocated for repairs. She doesn't even have time to eat or drink a glass of water. Anastasia did everything she could just to renew her reputation and prove that she was capable of something. She has no choice but to appear at the next debutante ball, which is less than a year away. In order to survive the palace coup, she'll have to endure, to whitewash his reputation not only inside the palace, but outside it as well. Meanwhile, the Emperor is visited by his aide, who proposes a meeting to discuss a solution to the drought in the east. The boy noticed that the gentleman was constantly thinking about something. He wondered if Wilhelm had any new ideas about tomorrow's meeting. The Emperor explained that it wasn't really about that at all. He was thinking about something to do with his wife's variables. The lad recalled that not long ago, the gentleman had refused to mention her name, or to think of that person at all. After talking to the maids, Steve told him that the girl had stopped leaving her office, and lately, she had stopped resting and messing up other people's lives. The Emperor never ceases to be amazed, and right after that, he wanted to meet her again. At the same time, he continues to hate her and doesn't want to hear anything about her. But at the same time, he has developed a very strong interest in her. The guy doesn't understand why it's happening, because he's long since fallen out of love with the girl. All this time, the guy was sure his wife would never change and would forever be a horrible person. But at some point she started to change, and it's no wonder he wanted to find out what she was doing it for. The Emperor suspects that trying to please his father isn't the only reason that has caused the villainess to change so much and take up her work. Steve suggested that the reason must be much more serious. All that was left was to find out what she was so badly afraid of and unwilling to let happen. At this moment, they concluded that the one thing to which the Empress would never change her attitude of course this money, she would never give it up and would do her best not to lose all her possessions. In the meantime, An assistant came to the girl and said that the Duke wanted to talk to her. The girl agreed, came to her father's office and said that she would be glad to help him. Besides, she had something to tell him. This time, his daughter isn't worried about anything. She's completely calm and looking forward to telling him about her progress, though perhaps he had been told all about it long ago, at which point the man drank his tea, and the girl offered to pour him another drink. He refused and said she didn't have to do it, even now. The man doesn't recognize his daughter. She's visibly changed. When he asked her to stand less rude, he had no idea Anastasia would take it so seriously. From the moment the girl first walked into his office, she was very different from what she was before. Her mannerisms had changed, her voice had changed, and more. Duke stopped talking. He just started watching her and admiring the changes. This is the first time his daughter doesn't argue with him and try to please him. She even offered to pour tea for him instead of the assistant. He gets the impression that the girl has been switched by someone else. Finally, she did pour him some tea. The man tasted it, and it was as if he had a completely different flavor. He could not believe his eyes. Her manners, demeanor, speech, and every movement had become so much more noble. So he couldn't help himself and started praising her. The man confessed that he was sure his daughter would do exactly the opposite, and become even worse. But in the end, she turned into a lovely, sweet girl who is a pleasure to talk to. All his life he had dreamed of seeing her exactly like this, calm and polite. Anastasia thanked him for these words and said that this was just the beginning. At this fine moment, instead of imperial affairs and staff relations, her father asked exactly what she hadn't done: relations with the emperor. I wonder why the girl did the hardest thing and the easiest thing she couldn't do. Unfortunately, she can't say that the problem is that she's not allowed to love him. Also, that she's saving room for the main character who's about to show up. Anastasia was silent and made it clear that she didn't want to talk about it yet. The man understood this hint and said that anyway, she was doing a good job. After that, the father asked if she had enough personal money. The girl did not expect to hear this question and does not understand why he asks it. Turns out last month he refused to support her in this endeavor and limited his daughter as much as he could. The man explained that he would be happy to give her a lot of money, but through restriction, it would allow her to understand the true value of money and learn how to manage it. The thing is, even though Anastasia's the empress, in the original story, some things didn't depend on her alone. To pay for all the things she needed to live a chocolate life, she needed a lot more than she was allotted. So, she had to ask for extra money from her parents. At that moment, when she heard her father's words, the girl remembered a moment from the storyline, and the second she starts running away, she wants to see if it's really as bad as she realized. Anastasia picked up some book, opened it, found the right page and realized it was too bad. She could not believe her eyes. The Empress has no personal money since her father stopped helping her with it, and she'll have to find a way to earn it on her own because there's no telling when she might need it. It turns out he didn't have any money not because there was too little. In fact, the real villain was spending it every day. It was huge sums that his father didn't have time to replenish. It is not surprising that having opened the box, there was not a single coin there. The girl does not understand why she had not remembered and taken care of it earlier. At this point, she is very upset, because she doesn't know what to do now, and how to earn at least some money. An assistant came up to her and asked if she had some free time. The Empress asked what was wrong, and it turns out some lady was already waiting for her in the drawing room. The girl heard her surname, and was very happy. She immediately got in the mood and wanted to see her as soon as possible. The Empress replied that she agreed to meet, and asked her assistant to prepare the most beautiful and comfortable place in the garden. The weather is wonderful today, plus, after such great news, Anastasia forgot about all her problems. Meanwhile, she met a guest, and this girl was her childhood friend, Maria, and they were very happy to see each other. I really wonder what she came for and if she has any good news. Since they haven't seen each other for a long time, Anastasia doesn't even know how to behave herself. She is very glad to see her, and only thanks to her, this day has become much more beautiful. Because a few minutes ago, the girl hated the whole world and everyone around her. Lady Mary, in the original story, she's only a minor character who has a couple lines in the story, but she's the only one who is able to calm her friend down. She constantly helped her and tried to do it even when no one asked her to. Anastasia always knew that her friend would never say no and would always be there for her. All this time, she really missed having a real friend to talk to about her problems and worries like she used to. Meanwhile, they began to discuss the latest news, which even neighboring empires know. Mariah said that she had heard some rumors, so immediately reported everything, but warned that she might not like this information. Anastasia replied that she was already used to such things and nothing could surprise her, so she could safely tell her about everything. It turns out there have long been rumors that the Empress is putting on a show for lack of money. They just laughed it off, for it was no surprise Anastasia had expected to hear something more offensive and unpleasant. Then, the girlfriends began to reminisce about their tradition of having tea parties. They really liked to talk in the evenings and discuss their plans. Lately, Maria has been attending a lot of fancy places and events. But in her opinion, nothing compares to the atmosphere they used to create for themselves. Because it was just beautiful. They really miss those times, and would be happy if it could be resumed somehow. At this moment, the girl decided to please her friend and said that in the near future, she was going to organize a small party, and of course, Maria was invited to it. The girl was very happy, and thanked for the invitation. The Empress's assistant came up to them and decided that, for the time being, she would not distract them from their conversation. The woman keeps thinking that without money, the girl will not last long. She will have to find a way to earn at least something. She doesn't understand how Anastasia can relax and talk to her friend when she has so many problems and not just with money. After the meeting with Maria, the girl returned to the mansion and as usual, Wilhelm everything began to ask a lot of questions. This time, she wants to know about the party, which she promised to hold to her friend. In any other situation, she wouldn't care about it at all. But since there's a big money problem, but doesn't understand how a girl would throw this party. She assumed that the girl was thinking of asking her father for help, and as soon as she said that phrase, the Empress replied that she wasn't going to ask him for anything. She flatly refuses to ask him for help, that she can think of something else and manage without him. Anastasia said Elena didn't have to worry about that, because in fact the party will not be held in order to lose the last money. On the contrary, in this way, she wants to earn it. The woman had not expected to hear such an answer, and had not thought that the girl had planned it so deliberately. No wonder that on the same day the Emperor's aide, as usual, found out about everything and came at once to tell him about it. Wilhelm learned of the parties. Guy knows about her money problems. So when the aide told him about the party, the Emperor wasn't quite sure how she was going to pull it off. At this point, only the girl and her assistant know what the party is for. Everything is much more elaborate than it seems at first glance. Steve doesn't think anyone will come to this party, because most likely no one will be interested. The most he imagines is a small tea party with a few girlfriends. Afterwards, the Emperor asked if there was anything else of interest. The aide showed him the letter of invitation, which the Empress had sent out to the guests. Wilhelm didn't refuse and eagerly decided to see what it looked like. He opened the letter, and saw a very interesting inscription. Instead of the usual kind of invitation, it contained a note and some very strange words. It said the following: "You too can become Empress." Sounds too ambiguous? The Emperor doesn't know what it means and thought it was just some kind of joke. The assistant said that this invitation was even sent to his mom, which means there will be quite a few guests. As far as the Emperor knows, his assistant's parents are happy and loving, so such words are at least inappropriate for a married woman from an aristocratic family. When Steve's mom showed him this letter, she said this has never happened before. No one understands what the villain is up to. Since the marriage, people are already tired of counting how many strange things the Empress has done. But since everyone is very curious to know what will happen this time, no one will refuse, and will definitely show up at the party. People enjoy coming to events no matter what. There has never yet been a time when a party Anastasia threw was boring or uninteresting. Wilhelm dreams of unraveling what is the secret behind his wife's changes and plans. What she is doing now is completely different from how she behaved before. When they were together, the guy was sure he got to know her completely. He learned her character and more. But it turns out he was sorely mistaken. Because the girl has begun to suddenly take an interest in her direct duties as Empress, it is very difficult for him to understand her true intentions. No matter how much he tries to think about it and figure things out, William believes that his wife will never change, and everything that is happening now is part of her plan. However, what he saw in the temple he still remembers and can't understand why he was so strongly attracted to her. Even when she doesn't look at him and tries to ignore him, the guy stops controlling himself and doesn't notice how he starts showing interest in her. He wouldn't stop looking at her even when it wasn't the right time. They had come to a very sad event, and the whole time, he never once listened to the organizer's speech. Since that day, he's been in his office trying to figure out how to solve this mystery. As a result, he asked his assistant to do his best to keep looking for any hitches. He would welcome any information he could get. Even the deputy is surprised that the man who is married to this girl has no idea what she's up to. The emperor has always said that he knows his wife well and can understand her even without words, but apparently that's a bit of a misnomer. He has exaggerated his abilities and can't even imagine how poorly he knows her. Or rather that he doesn't know her at all. Before leaving, the aide asked him to keep in mind that only invited people could attend the event this time, to which the emperor replied that it would be possible to try to find out information, thanks to Steve's mom. The guy replied that it was a good idea. The main thing was that the woman would agree to it, because surely she would not want to do any important things at the moment when she wanted to relax and enjoy the event. In the end, the girl managed to interest almost the entire empire. Those who received an invitation are looking forward to the party's start. A couple of days later, the moment everyone had been waiting for, some started preparing from the very morning. Empress is one of them. The girl woke up early in the morning and asked her assistants to pick the best dress, hair, and makeup for her. At this moment, Elena came to her and reported that the place for the party had been successfully prepared. Everything was done in the best way, as she had asked. The girl thanked and thought about it, that her husband must be aware of her current financial situation. He must have been told about it a long time ago and more than once. Anastasia thinks it's more likely that the emperor sees this as another evil plan, because in other ways, she's never done it before. In any case, even if her husband starts to suspect her of something or realizes why she's doing it, there's nothing the girl can do about it. First, she needs to focus on tonight's party. Anastasia asked if all the invited guests had arrived, and as it turned out, absolutely everyone had come. No one was late or canceled. It so happens that usually, a girl invites her friends. Most often they are no more than 10 people. She tried to create a luxurious atmosphere and made the party venue as beautiful and elegant as possible. Luckily, she had enough party decorations without having to spend any money. The only good thing the villain has done in the past. She didn't throw away the jewelry and kept it in a special box. Meanwhile, the assistants have finished their work, and the Empress's makeup and hair are ready. The girl opened her eyes, looked in the mirror, and saw an incredibly beautiful lady in the reflection. The assistants did their job to perfection. Anastasia couldn't stop admiring her appearance. It turned out much more beautiful than she expected. In this form, she will feel the most confident. The girls picked the perfect makeup. The Empress did not see any flaws. She likes everything very much. After that, the girl said goodbye and went about her business, at which point her assistants were frozen in one place, thinking they had heard the same thing. The Empress praised their work and did not notice a single flaw. This happened for the first time. Usually the girl punished them for not emphasizing her beauty enough.